My parents said I was a useless failure and threw me out in the rain. My father pointed at the door and yelled, "Go live in the streets." They didn't know the truth, that I make $15 million a year. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, picked up my jacket, and walked out while their words echoed like thunder behind me. 3 weeks later, I owned everything they once bragged about. But that night when the rain hit my face, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something inside me had finally snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to reconsider. I didn't look back and ask why the people who were supposed to protect me wanted to break me instead. I just stood there in the cold, watching the lights behind the windows fade, realizing that blood doesn't always mean family, and sometimes strangers treat you better than the ones who raised you. Most people think revenge begins with anger, but the real beginning is silence. It's the moment you finally understand that you owe no explanations, no proof, and no second chances to anyone who wants to see you fail. I had already built my empire quietly, in shadows they never bothered to look into. They were so focused on what they thought I was, they never saw who I was becoming, and that's why I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a reckoning. They threw me out thinking they were cutting me off from stability. They had no idea they were pushing me into the freedom I needed to take everything they once used to belittle me. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I read every single message because your presence reminds me I'm not telling this story alone. Before that night, life had already felt like a battle I couldn't win. My parents weren't cruel in the obvious sense. They were proud, successful, and demanding. But to them, my dreams were always too big, my ambitions unrealistic, and my methods pointless. Every achievement I celebrated, they dismissed. Every idea I nurtured, they criticized. I wasn't just failing in their eyes, I was failing them. The very people who had supposedly given me everything. I remember the small moments that led up to that stormy night. Every argument, every lecture about responsibility, every accusation of laziness, they built a mountain of resentment and silent determination inside me. They never knew that while I pretended to comply, I was quietly learning, experimenting, and building the foundations of something bigger than they could imagine. The irony is, the more they pushed me down, the stronger I became. Money wasn't the only measure of success for me, but it was a byproduct of my focus. I spent countless nights teaching myself skills they believed were useless: digital ventures, small investments, strategic planning. I read every book, studied every market trend, and connected with mentors in ways they never noticed. I was growing quietly while they mocked me openly. The very humiliation they delivered fueled a fire that no scolding, no insult, no rejection could extinguish. When the argument escalated that night, it wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of years of misunderstanding. They saw only my failures and ignored the work I had done behind closed doors. My father's words, "Go live in the streets," cut deeper than any slap or insult could, not because they hurt me physically, but because they symbolized the ultimate dismissal of everything I had worked toward. But inside, I had already made a decision. I wouldn't let their opinion define my worth. I packed my jacket, took a deep breath, and stepped into the rain. The cold water hitting my skin was like a baptism, painful, shocking, and strangely liberating. For the first time, I felt truly untethered. I wasn't living by anyone else's rules. I wasn't constrained by the expectations of people who had never understood my vision. That night, every drop of rain felt like a reminder that the world doesn't owe you compassion, but it does reward perseverance. Even as I wandered through the empty streets, I wasn't lost. I had a plan, even if no one else could see it. I reached out to contacts I had built quietly over the years, started small ventures, and reinvested every dollar I earned with precision. My parents had thrown me out thinking I'd hit rock bottom, but in reality they had just removed the walls that kept me confined. The streets weren't a punishment, they were my launch pad. And while their words echoed in my mind, I made a promise to myself. I would not only survive, but I would thrive. I would show them, and everyone who doubted me, that usefulness is not defined by the opinion of others, and success is not measured by their approval. The first few nights on my own were the hardest. The rain hadn't stopped falling, and the streets were colder and harsher than any words my parents had thrown at me. I didn't have a home, I didn't have comfort, and I didn't have anyone to rely on. But I had something far more powerful: a plan and an unshakable belief in my own abilities. I found shelter where I could. Abandoned buildings, quiet alleys, and even under bridges when the cold became unbearable. Every step, every choice was a lesson in survival. I learned how to move silently, how to avoid dangers that most people overlook, and how to stretch a single dollar into a week's worth of food. Hunger, fear, and exhaustion became my teachers, and I took notes mentally, storing every lesson for the future. During the days, I observed the world around me. People rushed past me, consumed by their routines, oblivious to the struggle of someone fighting for survival. And yet, even in the chaos of the city, I noticed opportunities. Small things most would dismiss. A discarded newspaper, a conversation overheard, a chance to help someone for a favor later, became tools I could leverage. I realized that life on the streets wasn't just about surviving. It was about learning to read the world, to anticipate moves, and to turn even despair into an advantage. I also began connecting with people who had been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed by society. They weren't wealthy, educated, or powerful, but they were resourceful. They knew the streets in ways I hadn't imagined. Some offered guidance, others offered friendship, and a few became silent allies. I realized that the world is full of hidden networks, and if you know how to tap into them, you can turn even the direst situation into a stepping stone. But survival was just the beginning. I knew that to truly reclaim my life and prove everyone wrong, I had to act strategically. I began taking small steps toward building an income, leveraging skills I had honed while my parents doubted me. I created online ventures, offered freelance services, and slowly reinvested whatever I earned into bigger projects. Every small success felt monumental, because I was proving to myself, in ways my parents could never see, that I was far from useless. Even as I worked, I carried the memory of their words with me. Go live in the streets. I turned it over in my mind constantly, letting it fuel my determination. I imagined the day when I would look back and see the streets not as punishment, but as the launchpad that had made me stronger, smarter, and unstoppable. Each challenge, each cold night, each moment of hunger was shaping me into someone they could never ignore or dismiss again. By the end of the third week, I had done something remarkable. I had secured a small but steady stream of income, had connections I could rely on, and had a vision for the life I was about to reclaim. The streets, which were meant to break me, had instead taught me resilience, resourcefulness, and patience. And for the first time I smiled, not because I had survived, but because I knew the tide was about to turn. The breakthrough came when I least expected it. After 3 weeks surviving on the streets, I had learned to read people, to find opportunities where others saw none, and to act decisively when chance appeared. One evening, as I walked past a small cafe in a quieter part of the city, I noticed a group of business people arguing over a failed deal. Most would have passed by, pretending not to notice, but I saw it as an opening. Using nothing but my instincts, confidence, and the knowledge I had quietly built over years, I approached them. I introduced myself, offered a solution to their problem, and within hours, they were impressed by my insight and strategy. They didn't know my background. They didn't know I'd been homeless for weeks. They only knew that I had the answer they needed. By the end of the night, I had secured my first big client, and with that, my first real step out of the shadows of the streets. That moment was intoxicating. It wasn't just about money. It was about proving to myself that even in the worst circumstances, I could create value, command respect, and take control. The streets had taught me survival, but this moment taught me strategy. I realized that the same people who had dismissed me, mocked me, and thrown me out would never anticipate the level of resilience and ingenuity I could summon when pushed to the edge. Word of my skills began to spread quickly. I started receiving small projects, consulting gigs, and opportunities that allowed me to turn every dollar I earned into larger ventures. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, and the city that had once felt like a trap now felt like a playground of possibilities. I could finally see the path to reclaiming the life that my parents had tried to deny me. But the climax wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. One evening, I walked past my old home. The lights were on, the familiar sounds of their lives echoing through the walls, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected. Calm vindication. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel revenge in the traditional sense. I simply felt the satisfaction of knowing that their words, their actions, and their judgment no longer had power over me. I had proven my worth in ways they would never anticipate. And yet, even as I stood there, I knew this was only the beginning. My first success was a spark. It was proof that I could rise from nothing. But the real transformation required consistency, strategy, and patience. Every opportunity I took, every relationship I built, and every project I completed would compound into something far greater than they could imagine. In that moment, I smiled to myself, not because I had finally succeeded, but because I had turned rejection into fuel, humiliation into strategy, and the streets into my teacher. I was no longer a useless failure. I was someone unstoppable, and the people who had tried to define me would soon learn that the most dangerous people are those they underestimate. The taste of that first victory was sweet, but I knew it wasn't enough. One client, one project, one breakthrough, these were the sparks, but not the fire. I wanted more. I wanted stability, recognition, and ultimately, control over my own life in a way no one could ever take away from me. That night I made a decision. I would not just survive, I would dominate every opportunity the world threw at me. I started analyzing the patterns I had observed during my time on the streets. I noticed how people interacted, where they ignored opportunities, and how they underestimated others. Every small detail became a lesson, every observation a tool. I knew that true success wasn't just about working harder than everyone else. It was about working smarter, being strategic, and using the very judgment of others against them. I began to expand my ventures, taking calculated risks that others would never dare. I invested the earnings from my first project into multiple small businesses, digital platforms, and freelance opportunities. Each step was deliberate. Each choice had been carefully studied and tested in my mind before execution. And slowly but surely the tide began to shift. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a strategist, a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, whispers of my success began to reach my old circles. Former acquaintances and even some distant family members started noticing changes in my life. They saw signs of growth, subtle but undeniable, yet none of them could guess the truth. That the person they had written off as a failure was quietly building an empire that would soon overshadow everything they had ever done. One evening, as I sat in a small cafe reviewing my progress, I received an unexpected email. A major investor had noticed my work and wanted to meet. They were impressed not just by the results, but by the ingenuity, resilience, and strategic thinking I displayed. It was the validation I had been waiting for, not from my parents, not from society, but from people who recognized skill and vision when they saw it. The irony was delicious. My parents had thrown me out, convinced I was useless, while I was quietly positioning myself to acquire wealth, power, and influence far beyond what they could have imagined. I could almost see the shock on their faces if they knew what was coming. But I didn't dwell on it. My focus was forward, not backward. Every interaction, every opportunity, every decision was now about building momentum, scaling influence, and cementing the independence that had once seemed impossible. And yet, even as the victories stacked up, I never lost the lessons from the streets. Hunger, struggle, rejection, and cold rain, they had taught me patience, resilience, and strategy. They had instilled a quiet confidence that no amount of ridicule or dismissal could shake. With every milestone, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by clarity and determination. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated or told you were useless? Take a moment to think about it. Every word meant to break, you can become fuel if you're willing to harness it. And if you want to hear more stories of survival, strategy, and triumph, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. By the end of that month, I had multiple streams of income, growing influence, and a clear roadmap for the life I had always dreamed of. The streets that were meant to break me had instead forged me into someone unstoppable. And the people who once doubted me, my parents, the neighbors, the naysayers, had no idea that the game had already changed, and I was now leading it. By now, the world I had once struggled to survive in had started to bend to my will. Every sleepless night, every cold rain-soaked evening, every pang of hunger, they weren't just memories anymore. They were tools I used to sharpen my instincts, refine my strategy, and build an unstoppable drive. The streets had taught me survival, but my efforts over the past weeks had begun to teach me dominance. I noticed the subtle shifts everywhere. People who had dismissed me, colleagues who had ignored my suggestions, and even acquaintances from my old life were now watching, curious and cautious. They didn't know the full extent of my progress, but they could sense the change, the quiet confidence, the calm precision, the way I made decisions without hesitation or fear. My presence alone now carried weight, and that power was intoxicating. Financially, the results were undeniable. The projects I had taken on multiplied in value. Every connection I had made in the streets, every favor repaid, every opportunity seized, had compounded into a steady flow of income that exceeded anything I could have imagined. Within weeks, I had secured not just independence but dominance in my niche. I was building my empire while the people who had once ridiculed me still assumed I was struggling. But the true impact wasn't just material, it was psychological. I had transformed my mindset. I no longer needed validation from my parents or anyone else. I realized that their words, which had once felt like chains, were now my fuel. The humiliation they had inflicted, the rejection they had forced upon me, had forged a resilience that no comfort or privilege could ever replicate. I had learned that the greatest victories are often internal, invisible to those who doubt you the most. There were moments when I reflected on the irony of it all. The very people who had thrown me out, convinced I was useless, were now powerless to influence my life. I wasn't seeking revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't going to humiliate or lash out. The real satisfaction came from knowing that their perception of me no longer mattered, that I had created a reality they could never touch, and that I had done it on my own terms. Yet even as I celebrated these achievements, I stayed grounded. Every decision was deliberate. Every investment was strategic. Every connection I nurtured was built with intention. The lessons from the streets, observation, patience, improvisation, remained at the core of everything I did. I knew that this foundation, forged in struggle, would support the long-term growth and sustainability of my independence. And the most rewarding impact of all was the sense of freedom. Freedom from judgment, freedom from limitation, and freedom from the belief that anyone could define my worth. I had been told I was useless, but I had proven the opposite not through confrontation, but through relentless action and unshakable determination. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever turned someone's doubt into your strength? Every insult, every dismissal, every forced setback can be transformed into power if you're willing to use it wisely. And if you want to see more stories of people taking control of their destinies, make sure to subscribe. These aren't just tales, they're lessons in strategy, patience, and triumph. By the end of this stage, I wasn't just surviving or building, I was thriving. I had taken the chaos of the streets, the rejection of my parents, and the doubts of everyone around me, and converted them into something unstoppable. And I knew that the next chapter of my journey would be even greater, as I prepared to show the world the full scale of what I was capable of. The true turning point came a few months later, when everything I had quietly built collided with an opportunity I could no longer ignore. By now, I had established multiple streams of income, growing influence, and a network of allies who respected and trusted me. But it wasn't enough to simply survive and thrive in the shadows. I wanted undeniable proof that I had transformed my life entirely, and that those who had doubted me would see the consequences of underestimating me. It happened when a major industry event brought together entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders from all over the city. I attended, blending in like just another participant, unnoticed by those who had once belittled me. But I had a plan. I wasn't going there to mingle aimlessly, I was going there to make a statement. Every interaction, every conversation, every gesture was calculated. I wanted to reveal my growth, but on my own terms. During the event, I was introduced to a potential investor whose company had been struggling for months. They were on the brink of collapse, desperate for a solution. Most people would have seen this as a simple networking opportunity. I saw it as the moment to leverage every skill I had learned, from surviving the streets to building my empire in secret. I analyzed the company's problems, identified weaknesses, and proposed a solution so precise and impactful that it left them stunned. Within hours, I had secured not just their trust, but a partnership that would multiply my influence and revenue exponentially. The thrill wasn't just in the money, it was in the proof. For the first time, I realized that the combination of street-honed resilience, strategic thinking, and relentless focus was unstoppable. I had taken the humiliation, the rejection, and the ridicule from my parents and transformed it into undeniable power. The people who had dismissed me, the very individuals who thought I was worthless, now had no choice but to recognize that I had emerged stronger than they could ever imagine. By the end of the evening, whispers of my accomplishments had spread across the room. Former classmates, distant acquaintances, and even a few people who had doubted me professionally approached with awe, curiosity, and, in some cases, quiet envy. I didn't flaunt my achievements, I let them unfold naturally, like the inevitable result of careful planning and relentless effort. That night, as I left the venue, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and calm. I had achieved more than mere success. I had reclaimed my identity, rebuilt my confidence, and transformed the narrative that others had written for me. No longer was I the useless failure my parents had labeled. I was someone who could thrive under any circumstance, Someone whose resilience and intelligence could turn even the harshest rejection into triumph. And the best part? I hadn't done it out of spite. I had done it out of purpose, discipline, and self-belief. Every insult, every cold night, every doubt had been transformed into fuel for action. I had learned the most important lesson. Real power comes from patience, preparation, and perseverance, not revenge. Before I move on, I want to ask you, have you ever faced a moment where everyone doubted you, and you had to prove yourself silently? Take a moment to think about it. And if you're inspired by stories of resilience and triumph against all odds, don't forget to subscribe. You'll see more tales of people turning rejection into unstoppable success. By the time I walked home that night, I knew one thing for certain: my life had changed forever. I had taken every setback and weaponized it, not to destroy, but to build. And from that moment forward, nothing could stop me. After that night, I knew the game had shifted completely. I wasn't just someone who had survived the streets. I was someone who had transformed every obstacle into an opportunity. Every doubt, every insult, every forced setback had become fuel for my ambition. And now it was time to escalate, to take the next steps toward a life that no one, not even my parents, could ever question or diminish. I started by analyzing every aspect of my growth, every connection I had made, and every opportunity I had seized. The streets had taught me observation. The streets had taught me patience. The streets had taught me how to read people and situations with precision. Now I applied those lessons to every decision I made in business, in strategy, and in life. Nothing was random. Everything was deliberate. I expanded my ventures further. Small wins turned into larger projects, and I reinvested profits into multiple streams of income. I wasn't chasing money blindly. I was creating influence, stability, and power. Every deal I closed, every relationship I nurtured, and every project I completed amplified my independence. I had become untouchable in the circles where I once felt invisible. Meanwhile, the people who had doubted me began to notice. Former classmates, colleagues, and even distant relatives could no longer ignore the results of my efforts. They whispered, speculated, and tried to piece together the story of my sudden rise. But the truth was far more dramatic than anyone could imagine. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the hunger, the cold rain, or the mental fortitude required to turn rejection into domination. My parents, in particular, remained oblivious to the scale of my achievements. They assumed that throwing me out had broken me, that their words had crushed my potential. Little did they know, those very words had sparked a transformation. I wasn't just succeeding, I was thriving on a level they could never comprehend. The irony was delicious, but I didn't need to prove anything to them directly. Success, after all, is the most elegant form of revenge. During this period, I also focused on personal growth. I strengthened my mind, refined my strategies, and built a disciplined routine that reinforced resilience and intelligence. Every morning, I reminded myself of where I had come from, the streets, the ridicule, the rejection, and I used those memories as a compass to navigate the challenges ahead. I knew that the real victory wasn't just wealth, it was mastery over my own destiny. And the results spoke for themselves. Within months, my influence, income, and reputation had grown exponentially. I wasn't merely surviving, I was shaping the world around me, crafting a life of independence, strength, and undeniable impact. The useless failure label my parents had assigned no longer applied. I had redefined it entirely. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or cast aside, only to find your strength in that very rejection? Think about it. Every insult can become fuel if you channel it correctly. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience, transformation, and triumph against all odds, make sure to subscribe. I promise, the story isn't over yet. By the end of this stage, I had not only established financial and professional dominance, but I had also cemented a mindset of unstoppable confidence. Every challenge I had faced was now a stepping stone, and the world that once seemed unrelenting was now my arena. The real journey, the one that would define everything, was only just beginning. By this stage, my life had transformed completely. The streets that once seemed like a punishment had become my teacher. The ridicule, rejection, and disdain from my parents had become fuel for relentless determination. I wasn't just financially independent, I was mentally, emotionally, and strategically untouchable. Every decision I made now was rooted in experience. Every opportunity I seized had been carefully analyzed, and every action reinforced my path to lasting success. The impact of this transformation wasn't subtle. My ventures grew exponentially. What had started as small projects had now blossomed into multiple streams of income, partnerships, and business opportunities I had never dreamed possible. Investors who had initially doubted me were now seeking my advice. Former classmates and colleagues watched from the sidelines, unable to comprehend how someone they once dismissed had risen to such prominence in just months. And all the while I maintained a calm, quiet focus, letting results speak louder than words ever could. But the true resolution came not just from success, but from the personal realization that I had become someone unshakable. The anger and hurt I had felt when my parents threw me out had transformed into clarity and resilience. I understood that no one else has the power to define your worth. I had reclaimed control over my life, and every day, I reinforced that control through discipline, smart choices, and strategic planning. Even the people who had doubted me in my past, the neighbors, the peers, and most poignantly my parents, were forced to confront the reality of my transformation. They could no longer ignore my achievements or my influence. Their words had lost power over me, but the lessons I had internalized from them had created a foundation stronger than any privilege or opportunity they had ever given me. I also realized the profound truth that true impact is measured not by how others perceive you, but by how you navigate challenges and turn setbacks into advantages. The rain-soaked nights, the hunger, the isolation, they were all stepping stones toward a life I now controlled. Every struggle had been an investment in my resilience, and every act of doubt or dismissal had only sharpened my focus. By this point, my network had expanded, my ventures were thriving, and I had solidified the independence I had been seeking all along. I no longer chased validation, because I had created undeniable results that commanded respect on their own. The narrative that once labeled me a useless failure had been rewritten entirely, and I had written it myself. Before moving to the next chapter of my story, I want to ask you this. Have you ever taken someone's doubt and turned it into your power? Think about it. Every rejection, every insult, and every setback can be transformed into your fuel if you channel it with determination. And if you want to witness more stories of turning adversity into triumph, make sure to subscribe. There's still more to this journey, and the best is yet to come. By the end of this stage, I wasn't just surviving or thriving, I had become someone untouchable in my sphere, with control over my destiny and a life that no one could take from me. The lessons I had learned on the streets, the strategies I had built, and the resilience I had forged had become my most powerful assets. And I knew that the coming chapters would push me even further, testing the limits of what I could achieve. Looking back, it's almost surreal. The parents who once called me useless, who threw me into the rain as if I were nothing, now exist in a world where my success speaks louder than their words ever could. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to demand recognition. Life itself became the statement, the ultimate evidence of what happens when someone refuses to be defined by others' doubts. The fallout of my journey wasn't just financial, it was emotional and psychological. I learned the invaluable lesson that self-worth isn't granted. It's earned. That independence isn't given, it's taken. And that respect isn't demanded. It's proven through action. Every insult, every dismissal, every setback I faced became fuel for my growth. And in the end, it propelled me far beyond what anyone, including myself, might have imagined in those early, bleak nights. I now live a life of freedom, purpose, and confidence. I have built ventures, influence, and connections that secure not only my future, but also the lives of those I choose to help along the way. The streets that were meant to punish me became the forge that strengthened me, and the very people who sought to define me now watch as I thrive. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: no one else has the authority to define your potential. Rejection, failure, and criticism are not endings. They are opportunities. The power to rewrite your life lies within your hands. Every struggle can become the fuel for transformation if you have the courage, the strategy, and the perseverance to see it through. So, wherever you're watching this from, remember, greatness doesn't require permission. It requires action. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply rising above, smiling, and showing the world exactly who you are.